The autumn in Baizhou town and Haicheng felt like two completely different seasons. Haicheng was a city on the eastern coast. Geography books said it had a subtropical monsoon climate, with 4 distinct seasons. Autumn was autumn. After a rainfall, the plane tree leaves scattered yellow across the roadside, as if proclaiming the change of seasons. But it wasn't like that in Baizhou town. In English class, In Sichio propped her chin on her hand and gazed out the window. The teacher's voice was clear in her ears, but her mind was elsewhere, wondering when she would see the autumn of Baizhou town again. No fallen leaves carpeting the ground, no bleak autumn wind. One day, you'd open your eyes, and it would seem like, overnight, you'd from summer straight into winter. Shenfeng must have never seen it, right? She turned her head and secretly glanced at the last row. Shenfeng sat in the seat by the window in the very last row. A full half classroom away from her. At that moment, the boy didn't seem to be listening intently either. A pen rested between his thumb and index finger, twirling absently. He lowered his eyes and brows, silently lost in thought. His features were exceptionally beautiful, with delicate features, fair skin, and rosy lips. He wore the school uniform's white shirt, the top button undone, revealing part of his neck. His skin was as fair as his face, giving him an air of both detachment and fragility. He was entirely a beautiful youth who had stepped out of a manga, radiant and infinitely charming. The autumn sunlight, streaming in through the window, quietly kissed his cheek. In Sichio unconsciously felt dazed. In Sichio. On the platform, the English teacher stopped her lecture and slapped the desk heavily. Stand up. Suddenly called upon, In Sichio froze, her whole body stiffening. She turned her head back reflexively. She pressed her palm down and, under the teacher's expression, stood up nervously. Instantly, all eyes in the class converged on her. Was Shenfeng also looking at her? Would he realize she had just been secretly watching him? The teacher definitely couldn't guess what In Sichio was thinking. She continued lecturing with heartfelt emotion, "You're all in Senior 3 now. The college entrance exam is imminent. There's not much time left. And you still dare to let your mind wander in class? In Sichio, tell me yourself, is this proper behavior?" In Sichio lowered her eyes, twisting the hem of her clothes, her voice as faint as a mosquito's buzz. "It's not proper." Scattered laughter came from below. Smack. The English teacher slapped the blackboard again. "What are you laughing at? How can you still laugh? The teacher is worried to death." "All right, I won't waste class time. In Sichio, take your notebook, stand at the back of the class to listen, and reflect on yourself. If there's something very attractive at the back of the classroom, go look at it yourself. Don't turn your head and affect other students." In Sichio had no choice. She picked up her notebook and slowly shuffled towards the back of the classroom. She stood in front of the back blackboard. Her high ponytail hung behind her head, making her neck look slender. Standing straight, her movements slightly restrained, she looked very obedient. The teacher glanced at her and finally seemed satisfied. Soon, the classroom returned to its usual drowsy yet orderly atmosphere. Various English words, vocabulary, and sentence patterns drifted past her ears, like stones skipping across water, disappearing without a trace after causing a few ripples. In Sichio's mind wandered again, her gaze drifting towards Shenfeng. Because she was being punished to stand, her position was much closer to the last row. She no longer needed to turn her head or be so careful. Just a turn, probably 2 big steps away, and she could reach Shenfeng. But In Sichio felt she could never complete those 2 steps. 17 years old. This was the 4th year she had liked Shenfeng. Between them stood an invisible wall, long and sturdy, airtight to the point of despair. In the 2nd year of middle school, In Sichio's grandmother passed away, and she had to leave that small town and move to Haicheng with her parents to live. This was In Sichio's first time in a big city. Skyscrapers stood in rows, cars streamed endlessly. Everything was like a scene from a TV drama, dazzling and confusing. She found it incredibly novel. Unfortunately, her excitement didn't last long. In Fu had already arranged for In Sichio to transfer schools, enrolling her in Haicheng Experimental Affiliated Middle School. In Sichio's household registration was still in Baizhou Town, and due to the examination policy, she couldn't take the Haicheng High School entrance exam. Haicheng Experimental School was a private school, offering grades from elementary through high school. As long as you paid enough tuition fees, out-of-town students could advance directly, skipping the middle school exam hurdle. In Sichio's parents were ordinary migrant workers in Haicheng, not very wealthy financially. But for their only daughter, they still withdrew their years of savings to fund her education. The teaching pace in Haicheng was completely different from that in the small town. When In Sichio studied in Baizhou Town, she was considered a top student. But here, transferring in mid-semester, she simply couldn't adapt. Her Chinese was good, and her math could be made up. But her English lagged far behind her classmates. After all, the teaching staff in small towns wasn't as strong as in big cities. Teachers didn't focus much on speaking and listening, mostly on grammar and reading. The first time In Sichio was called upon to read an English text. As soon as she opened her mouth, her weakness showed. Scattered laughter came from around her. It wasn't malicious, but it was certainly embarrassing. Her cheeks flushed bright red. She lowered her head, wishing she could bury herself, become a desert ostrich. By then, her classmates had already been together for over 2 years, each with their own little groups and good friends. They couldn't readily accept a new outsider. In Sichio was alone for several weeks. Her parents were busy with work, and she couldn't find common ground with her classmates. She felt increasingly out of place in the big city. She became somewhat depressed. She missed her grandmother. She also missed her friends in Baizhou Town. The turning point came after the midterm exams. The class began changing seats. The homeroom teacher was very liberal and democratic, letting everyone freely choose partners, 2 to a desk. In Sichio had no friends. She could only carry her backpack and stand awkwardly at the back of the classroom, watching the lively scene. The class had an even number of students. In the end, one person would be left. They could be her deskmate, right? She thought, somewhat resignedly. Sure enough, in the end, only one seat remained empty in the whole class, in the last row, next to the seat by the window. Everyone else had put down their things and sat down. Only that spot remained empty. In Sichio hesitated for a few seconds, then tentatively moved towards that empty seat. She knew who was next to it. Shen Feng. Like her, he could be considered an invisible member of the class. But similar, yet different. She was adrift, with nowhere to belong. And Shen Feng was aloof, existing outside the crowd. In the few weeks of being in the same class, In Sichio had already learned that Shen Feng was consistently ranked first in the grade, and he also had such beautiful features and an outstanding demeanor that he had been crowned the school heartthrob of Haicheng Experimental, unmatched from the elementary to the high school division. Sometimes, girls from other classes would often come to the back door of their classroom, secretly watching him, or bring small snacks and put them on his desk. But Shen Feng never accepted any. He would casually throw them all in the trash. From In Sichio's observation, it seemed he couldn't speak. He didn't interact with classmates or teachers either, just sat in his seat reading leisurely books or rested with his head on the desk. A mute, and so handsome. It was truly a pity. Finally, In Sichio stopped walking. She mustered her courage and pulled out the empty chair next to Shen Feng. She bit her lip and whispered to the back of his head, excuse me, can I sit here? Sorry to bother you, but there are no other seats left. Shen Feng still faced the window, lying motionless. No reaction at all. Just as In Sichio was about to give up, he crooked his finger and casually, it seemed, tapped lightly on the desk. In Sichio paused. So, did this mean agreement? Regardless, she immediately hugged her backpack and sat down firmly, saying softly, "Thank you." Seizing the moment, she settled the matter. And thus, they became deskmates. One was the handsome, silent school heartthrob. The other was the friendless, marginal transfer student. This deskmate pairing lasted from second year of middle school until they graduated from third year, ending only when the entire grade was reshuffled into new classes. For In Sichio, falling for Shinfeng seemed effortless, requiring no thought or effort. Naturally, it happened so easily. The way he crooked his finger and tapped the desk had saved a young girl's fragile self-esteem and dignity. He never laughed inappropriately when she stumbled over words, and he never secretly called her a country bumpkin behind her back. He never hesitated to lend her his perfect test papers and notes. Or the way Shinfeng looked out the window, his superior facial contours, high nose bridge, tightly pressed thin lips, calm and indifferent, fitting every fantasy. Every single thing about him made In Sichio fall deeper. But the distance between them seemed as vast as heaven and earth. Grades, looks, family. All were worlds apart. And then there was Shinfeng's heart, fortified like a bronze wall, forever impossible to enter. During the year and more they were deskmates, In Sichio said countless thank yous to Shinfeng. In truth, behind every thank you lay a unspoken secret crush. She sorted and carefully stored all those feelings. Then, buried them deep in her heart. Shinfeng was In Sichio's dream, the last rose in her lonely, barren adolescence. He had saved her. Yet she couldn't stop her and her secret hopes. So, this was something she couldn't tell anyone. Jingle bell. Before she knew it, the bell rang for the end of class. The English teacher closed the exam paper, instructed the class representative to go to the office to get the day's homework, and finally announced class was dismissed. The classroom suddenly became noisy. It was only the beginning of Senior 3, and the lingering effects of summer vacation were still present. Although parents and subject teachers had started to constantly remind them, after all, the students were still just teenagers, on the cusp of adulthood, and couldn't resist seizing every unsupervised moment to joke around. Under the pressure of the college entrance exam, it was also a form of relaxation. Ding Qing stood up from her seat, bounced over to In Sichio. Chiu. In Sichio was still lost in thought and was startled by her. Instantly, her expression became a bit flustered. Her fingers unconsciously tightened around her notebook. She opened her mouth and responded, Ding Qing blinked suspiciously, puzzled, and casually asked, "What were you thinking? Standing there in a daze for ages?" In Sichio shook her head, and nothing. Ding Qing was always carefree, not particularly sensitive, and wouldn't pry relentlessly. She shook her water bottle, and asked her, "Going to get water?" In Sichio, "Okay. Wait for you at the back door." With that, she bounced towards the back door. In Sichio returned to her seat, put her English notebook in her desk, and took out her empty water bottle from her backpack. In the of her backpack, there were also 2 rolls of grape-flavored Mentos candy. Put in yesterday, unopened. She thought for a moment, took one out, and held it in her palm. As she passed by the last row of the classroom, In Sichio paused briefly in front of Shinfeng's desk. Tap. The whole roll of Mentos touched the desk, making a soft sound. In Sichio's voice drifted, seemingly carrying an unconscious tremor. She whispered, "Shinfeng, thank you for the other day." No answer. Shinfeng couldn't speak. But it was okay, he wouldn't throw away her candy. In Sichio was sure of that. Because, in the over 4 years they had known each other, this was the only thing that could be called. Ding Qing was waiting in the hallway. In Sichio quickly hurried over. Taking big strides, her ponytail swaying behind her head, folding the soft, scattered scent of the autumn sun. Shinfeng silently withdrew his gaze. After In Sichio reached her, Ding Qing glanced towards the back door of the classroom and asked mysteriously, "Chiu, what were you just saying to Shinfeng?" Ding Qing hadn't been directly promoted from the middle school division. She had only entered Haichang Experimental High School after the high school entrance exam. Naturally, she didn't know much about Shenfeng and Yin Sichio's past. Yin Sichio shook her head and explained softly, "Last time I forgot my English weekly, remember? Later I borrowed Shenfeng's to photocopy. So I'm thanking him." That day had been an accident too. The start of the school year was the first of Senior 3, and Yin Sichio had done poorly. That weekend when the scores came out, the homeroom teacher called her parents to carefully explain the situation. Yin Sichio's parents were busy with work, rushing daily for their livelihood in Haichang, and had no time to scold her. They just told her to reflect on herself. She was feeling down, a bit confused and at a loss about the future. So much so that she even forgot to pack her weekend homework in her backpack. She only remembered on Monday at school. Yin Sichio always arrived very early, but going back home to get it was clearly unrealistic. At that time, the classroom was still empty. The handsome, quiet youth sat alone in the last row, holding a novel in his slender, well-defined fingers, but his gaze was fixed far away out the window. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Yin Sichio's mind. Why not ask Shenfeng to borrow his, cover the answers with blank paper, take it to the teacher's office to photocopy, and redo it? After all, back in middle school when they were desk mates, it wasn't like she hadn't borrowed homework from him before. Yin Sichio blinked. However, as soon as this idea appeared, the focus seemed to shift from photocopy the English weekly to finish homework to ask Shenfeng to borrow the English weekly. Everything in the world, once you added the words Shenfeng, might become the most important thing to her. Yin Sichio took a deep breath and turned around. Mustering her courage, she walked towards the last row. As the distance closed, she slowed down, squinted, and looked at the book in Shenfeng's hands. Yellow cover, with a church printed on the front. Next to it were the big characters Rome, and smaller, vertically arranged, the rise and fall of a city's history. The Haichang College entrance exam followed a 3+1 model, 3 main subjects plus 1 elective, with the math paper further divided into arts and science streams. To save time for exam preparation, Haichang Experimental High School in the second year. Except for a group of students confirmed to study abroad who entered the international class, the other students chose according to their preferences, entering classes for physics, chemistry, biology, or politics, history, geography. Each subject was further divided into 3 classes. Both Shenfeng and Yin Sichio were in Chemistry A class. Clearly, the content of the chemistry class exam had little to do with the rise and fall of Roman history. But for Shenfeng, reading some miscellaneous books couldn't shake his position as grade 1. If not for his inability to speak, he might already be preparing for the Qingbei self-enrollment next semester. Thinking about it that way, it was a bit of a pity. Since she was 14, Yin Sichio had always been very clear about the huge gap between them. This gap couldn't be by her giving it her all, choosing she wasn't very good at, choosing the chemistry class, striving to get into a class to be closer to Shenfeng. Some people were born to be looked up to. Perhaps because Yin Sichio had paused nearby for too long, Shenfeng seemed to sense something. He turned his face, shifting his gaze from the window back to her face. His look was light and indifferent, as if completely devoid of any emotion. Yin Sichio immediately lowered her eyes, a blush rising on her face. Afraid Shenfeng might suspect something, she took another deep breath, clenched her fist, and quickly stepped up to his desk. Then, she whispered, "Shenfeng, I forgot to bring that English weekly. Could I borrow yours to photocopy?" Morning self-study was still a while away. There was time. Shenfeng hesitated for almost no time. He quietly turned Rome over, closing it face down on the desk. Then, he pulled the English weekly from his desk drawer and placed it in front of Yin Sichio. The English weekly was folded to the size of a notebook, the front page a full reading passage. A top student probably didn't need notes. There wasn't a single key sentence underlined in the article, blank and clean. Only the words Shinfeng were written at the top of the paper. Shinfeng's handwriting was beautiful. Not the neat kind typical of girls, but closer to a slightly cursive running script, appearing sharp and every stroke powerful, as if penetrating the paper. Like a sharp blade, cutting through the air. Nothing like his own marginal personality. In Sichio had seen it many times. But every time she saw it again, her heart still pounded. She always felt everything about him was perfect, as if she had completely fallen into a hunter's trap. However, she controlled it very well, never revealing any signs in front of him. Pushing aside her thoughts, In Sichio picked up the English weekly and carefully said thank you, thanks. I'll hand it in for you after I photocopy it. She paused. Then felt in her pocket. No candy roll. In Sichio really liked grape Mentos. She often carried a roll with her, secretly popping one in her mouth when the teacher wasn't looking. The sweetness quickly spread in her mouth. It involuntarily lifted her spirits. Back when they were deskmates in middle school, she had tried sharing with Shinfeng. If she offered him one, he would definitely not open his palm. But if she put the whole, unopened roll on his desk, he wouldn't refuse. Unfortunately, that day, because of the In Sichio had been somewhat dazed and hadn't thought to bring candy. She could only bite her lip, hesitate for a while, and then speak again, I'll treat you to candy next time. Which led to today's interaction. In Sichio didn't explain so carefully to Ding Qing. She only gave a rough account. While talking, the two had arrived at the water room. Haicheng Experimental was a private school with facilities. In several teaching buildings, every 2 floors had a large water room, equipped with standard filtered water, a row of 20 taps, both hot and cold. Usually, there was no queue, ensuring students could get water anytime. After In Sichio and the others entered Senior 3, the high school division hallways and classrooms were fitted with surveillance cameras. Although there were rumors that besides exams, they weren't usually turned on, the deterrent effect of the cameras was there, making people nervous and thus, the water room became a popular hangout during breaks for and gossiping. It was always bustling and noisy. In Sichio and Ding Qing walked into the water room side by side. Sounds of boys and girls chatting filled their ears. Ding Qing seemed infected by the atmosphere. A thought struck her, and she leaned close to In Sichio to whisper. I heard from others before that Shinfeng used to be able to talk. He's not mute. In Sichio was slightly stunned. Ding Qing didn't notice her and continued, apparently, it started around the beginning of 2nd year of middle school. He just stopped talking. Chiyo, weren't you in the same class as him in middle school? I see you two get along okay. Do you know about this? In Sichio shook her head, lowering her eyes and tightening the lid on her water bottle, telling the truth, I only transferred to Haisher in the 2nd semester of 2nd year. I'm not really sure. Ding Qing pouted. Pretended to sigh. Such a pity, Shinfeng is so handsome. You have no idea, after we in 2nd year, the moment I walked into the classroom, I was almost blinded by his face. It was only later I found out he was mute, and looking at him then, I felt he was a bit gloomy. Chiyo, you have no idea, every time you talk to Shinfeng, I really want to give you a thumbs up. He really seems hard to get along with. How should I put it? Very much like gloomy, icy, delicate sick character in romance novels, the kind who would freeze you to death with at the slightest disagreement, very hard to approach. Gloomy icy type? Was there? In Sichio didn't think so at all. Ding Qing, seriously, girl, you're really the #1 person in our class. You have no idea how many girls in school like him. But for years, none dared to say a single word to him. While talking, the two had already left the water room and returned to the hallway. The classroom was in sight. In Sichio's steps faltered slightly. Her fingertips unconsciously tightened around her water bottle. Her voice was a bit ethereal, as if hiding a secret. How do you know? Ding Qing jerked her chin backward, heard it while getting water. So, by that logic, she was already lucky, wasn't she? At least, because of being ostracized in middle school, she had the chance to be deskmates with Shinfeng, to talk to him and get a little feedback. In Sichio curved her eyebrows. The corners of her mouth pressed lightly, forming a pair of small dimples. In the first semester of Senior 3, the teaching pace in Chemistry A class was fast. New content was already finished, and they directly started the first round of review. The chemistry teacher was also their homeroom teacher. Her surname was Pang, around 40 years old, with her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail at the nape of her neck. She wore glasses with lenses as thick as the bottom of wine bottles, looking very serious. The A-class students had nicknamed her Wind in one ear and out the other. Wind in one ear wooed into the classroom every morning, commandeering the morning self-study time to have them memorize and write chemical equations. Come on, pass out the dictation papers, get ready to write. Stop sighing. Look at your listless faces. Do you still look like Senior 3 students sprinting towards the college entrance exam? Vigor is the foundation for preparing for the exam. Is what the teacher says going in one ear and out the other again? What are you laughing at? What's so funny? From now on, dictating equations every morning will be routine. I don't want to hear anyone did poorly and claim they didn't know there would be dictation. These are basic skills, nothing needs preparing. They should be, understand? Receiving affirmative replies. Teacher Pang was finally satisfied. She turned around and wrote 2 big letters on the blackboard. Faye. Come on, ionic formula. You all still remember, right? For content that could be memorized by rote, aside from English, In Sichio was okay. Sometimes, she couldn't help but feel grateful. Good thing. Good thing Shinfeng chose chemistry. If he had chosen physics, she'd really be in the dark. In Sichio smilingly to herself. She calmed down, her pen tip landing on the dictation paper, smoothly writing the first ionic formula. Soon, she put down her pen. Time's about up. Come on, pass the dictation papers from the back to the front. After Wind in one ear collected the dictation papers, she casually shuffled them and randomly redistributed them row by row. As she handed them out, she explained, now you're in Senior 3, the teacher's time is tight too. I don't have time to catch each of you individually for dictation. I'm handing them out. Take one randomly. In a bit, we'll review together, and you'll correct the paper for the person you have. If it's right, check it. If it's wrong, write the correct ionic formula for them. Pay attention. If anyone helps modify answers to fool the teacher, that's not helping them, that's trying to harm them. Come exam time, which grader do you think will be kind enough to correct your answers for you? So after correcting, you must write your own name at the bottom. Let that classmate see who was trying to harm them. Then, grievances can be aired, scores can be settled, and they'll know who to confront. The entire morning self-study was spent dictating and correcting. The chemistry class representative collected the corrected dictation papers and handed them back one by one. Melodious music sounded from the broadcast. Time for morning exercises. Just then, In Sichio received hers from the front row. Instantly. Her eyes widened involuntarily. She had only gotten one formula wrong. The person had written the correct answer for her in red pen. The handwriting was familiar and beautiful, showing not a trace of cold detachment. At the bottom of the dictation paper, there was also that familiar signature. Shinfeng. Chio. Morning exercises, why aren't you leaving yet? From the front, Ding Qing called out to her cheerfully. Coming right now. In Sichio responded. She lowered her head. Carefully tucked that dictation paper into her book, as if it were a priceless treasure. She thought, she really liked Shinfeng. So much so that even a piece of paper with his name on it could become so incredibly important. However, this romantic coincidence seemed to be a one-time thing. In the following weeks of morning dictation, In Sichio never received a paper corrected by Shinfeng again. Nor did she ever receive his perfect dictation paper. What fate, what destiny, were just a yellow maple leaf, accidentally falling into, causing a few ripples, then vanishing without a trace. Perhaps, romance was always just whims and delusions, never making any sense. In the blink of an eye, it was early November. Haicheng had entered late autumn. In Sichio was afraid of the cold. She would wear an extra coat over her school uniform, wrapping herself up tightly. She was naturally slender. In the few years since coming to Haicheng, perhaps due to puberty, she had gained a little weight. But since entering Senior 3, in just a few months, she had quickly lost it again. Moreover, she wasn't short either. Seen from afar, her whole figure exuded a kind of lonely, frail. Even wearing heavy clothes couldn't hide it. Ding Qing was secretly very envious of this. "Chio, you're way too thin." On the playground, the bleak autumn wind gusted the chill of winter. The two girls each carried a cup of milk tea, walking shoulder to shoulder, slowly swaying back towards the teaching building. Ding Qing hooked the milk tea bag on her little finger, freeing both hands. She grabbed In Sichio, pushed up her sleeve, and gently pinched her forearm. She couldn't help but, "If you keep losing weight like this, you'll collapse before the exam. Look, when I pinch your wrist, it feels like it might snap. Stop losing weight, give us girls who gain weight just from drinking water a break, okay?" In Sichio looked at her smilingly, her face full of innocence. "But, I can't help it." Haicheng winters were damp and cold, usually a time for big appetites. But the pressure of Senior 3 was too great. Even delicious food placed before her seemed unappetizing and hard to swallow. In Sichio grew up in a small town. As far back as she could remember, her grandmother raised her. An elderly person, moving unsteadily, still had to carefully care for a young girl's 3 meals and daily needs. She wasn't extraordinarily or precocious, but she knew to feel for her grandmother. She couldn't be picky and troublesome. She generally ate whatever was given, simple and easy, also avoiding waste. Therefore, In Sichio had developed good habits since childhood and was never particularly picky. But if she couldn't eat, she couldn't eat. A poor appetite was truly beyond her control. It felt like if she ate one more spoonful of rice, she might throw up immediately. In Sichio had no choice but to herself, probably just stress, it should be fine after the exam. And besides, being thinner was prettier. She sat in front of Shinfeng's line of sight. Whenever he glanced forward, at this angle, he could see her. Imagining from the back view, a slender neck and a thin frame would certainly be more pleasing. As a girl caught up in a secret crush, she inevitably had, creating possibilities in her mind, hoping for the day